These are the pictures you've seen of January 6th. They're familiar because they've been playing on a loop on every media outlet in America for the last 2 years.
During the week of March 6th, Tucker Carlson released new footage from the Capitol from January 6, 2021. Now, most of this footage was in fact new, but some of it wasn't. Some of it we had seen at least a version of sometime over the past couple of years. None of it, in my opinion, was a bombshell. So Tucker had two basic themes, and he spends a lot of his time addressing these. The first is a counter-narrative to the Democrat/mainstream media narrative that January 6th was a deadly insurrection. He shows evidence that the entire Capitol was not engulfed in the riot.
Taken as a whole, the video record does not support the claim that January 6th was an insurrection. In fact, it demolishes that claim. And that's exactly why the Democratic Party and its allies in the media prevented you from seeing it.
So yeah, there were quiet areas of the Capitol. This is not the first time that we have seen people walking peacefully through the Capitol on January 6th. But that doesn't make the riot go away. The facts are what the facts are. There was a riot going on in the Capitol. Maybe not everywhere. People did get hurt, and property was damaged. There's no explaining that away. My opinion on the insurrection piece is that it didn't meet the criteria. There was no centralized planning. There was no centralized communication system. There was no coordination. The FBI showed this at the end of an investigation that they conducted in 2021. Okay, so again, that's not new. Now, there's plenty of reason to be skeptical of anything the FBI says right now. So maybe they don't want people looking too closely at their involvement. So on to the deadly part of the deadly insurrection. The Democrats, including the White House, claimed that 5 officers died on January 6th.
Over 100 officers were assaulted on that day. 5 officers died.
The only people who died on January 6th were protesters. You had Ashley Babbitt, who was shot by a Capitol police officer. You had 2 protesters who had fatal heart attacks. And you have another protester who died of a suspected drug overdose. The only one of those who can be tied directly to the actions of either the police or the protesters on January 6th is the shooting of Ashley Babbitt. She was shot at point-blank range by a Capitol police officer. She was unarmed. Following January 6th, 4 officers committed suicide. The 5th officer, Brian Sicknick, died of a stroke the day after. Carlson also presents evidence that Brian Sicknick, the 5th officer who died of a stroke, was not beaten to death with a fire extinguisher being swung by a rioter. This was a story that the New York Times ran with and many other media outlets shortly after January 6th.
They beat a Capitol police officer to death with a fire extinguisher.
Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the fight.
He died at the age of 42 after he was bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher.
Capitol Hill cop Brian Sicknick was killed by a blow to the head with a fire extinguisher.
The medical examiner concluded that Brian Sicknick did not suffer any sort of blunt force trauma.
We begin this half hour with breaking news on the Capitol riot. The medical examiner has released the cause of death for Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick. It turns out Officer Sicknick suffered a stroke and died of natural causes. Investigators initially believed that he was hit in the head with a fire extinguisher.
So while Carlson does present some additional footage, he doesn't give us anything really new here. All of these things had been established already. The second theme that Carlson spends a lot of time on is the QAnon shaman, Jacob Chansley. He was the guy in the Viking hat carrying the American flag with the painted face. The media portrayed him as the face of the insurrection.
Chansley, face painted, wielding a spear, and wearing a horned hat, became one of the most notorious faces from that deadly January day.
Chansley is now in jail, serving 41 months for obstruction of official proceedings. Not for doing anything violent, not for any property destruction, but for getting in the way. Now, I think at least some of the media attention had to come from this rather ridiculous outfit he was wearing. I mean, he made himself the center of attention. That doesn't make him in any way a leader of an insurrection or of a riot or anything like that. And this is what Carlson shows. They show him very peacefully meandering through the Capitol, escorted by police. And these police make no attempt to arrest him or stop him. It does look as if they are giving him a tour. Carlson claims that the new footage of Chansley being escorted destroys the prosecution case against him, and that an innocent man is now in jail for crimes he did not commit. I think he's overstating that a little bit. Chansley is not necessarily in jail because the defense didn't have the footage. The defense did request the footage, and it could be that the prosecution was dragging their feet getting it to the defense. I have no problem believing that at all. But the direct reason Chansley is in jail is because he took a plea deal before the government had the opportunity to present the evidence to them, any new evidence that may have come from unseen footage. And it wasn't a good deal for Chansley. There was no reduction in sentence compared to others who were convicted of similar charges, and he also had to surrender several paths toward appeal. So he's kind of locked in on how he can and cannot appeal. But the defense arguably jumped the gun on this.
The plea agreement that Albert Watkins talked him into signing waived all of his appeal rights. So he had no opportunity to go to the Circuit Court of Appeals to raise any issues connected to his conviction. He had limited rights to challenge the performance of Albert Watkins as his lawyer. When I came into the case, that's the first subject I began discussing with him, was my criticisms of what Watkins talked him into doing. It was a terrible plea agreement. It was an unconscionable plea agreement. Watkins had him plead guilty before the government was even willing to say it had produced all the video. The government in August of 2021 was still telling judges, we haven't been able to get all of the evidence to defense lawyers, so please don't set trial dates. Albert Watkins didn't care. He convinced his client to take the offer the government had made and plead guilty. So he's in a little bit of a mousetrap.
Chansley's defense lawyer cut this deal with the prosecution, and he pled guilty. And that is why he is in jail. Matt Christensen did an excellent video looking at the timeline and digging into the court document. You should really check out his YouTube channel. He does a great job. So I think it's fair to say that the right was really hoping for a massive bombshell to blow up in Democrats' faces. And that didn't happen. Then again, Carlson has a lot more footage, and we have no idea what we'll see next, if anything. But Chuck Schumer seems to think that a bombshell did go off in his face.
I don't think I've ever seen a primetime cable news anchor manipulate his viewers the way Mr. Carlson did last night. I don't think I've ever seen an anchor treat the American people and American democracy with such disdain. And he's going to come back tonight with another segment. Fox News should tell him not to. Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, tell Carlson not to run a second segment of lies. You know it's a lie. You've admitted it's a lie.
Schumer calls out Carlson's supposed disdain for the American people. But it's Schumer who seems to believe that the American people can't evaluate Carlson's program by themselves. Americans know that the right's going to spin right and the left is going to spin left. And they're smart enough to factor that in when they're evaluating a news item. They don't need Chuck Schumer's help. Now, I think it's disturbing when the highest-ranking Democrat in the Senate calls on Fox News to censor themselves. We've seen plenty of attempts that the Biden administration has made to restrict the information Americans can access. Freedom of the press is a constitutional right, and neither Schumer nor any other government official has any business calling for self-censorship. I think Carlson's first two broadcasts are going to have minimal impact, if anything. I think people have made up their minds about January 6th, and Carlson didn't really add any new information that should sway anyone. Everything Carlson highlighted, we have seen before. Maybe not as extensive, maybe not the same camera angles, but we've seen it all. Brian Sicknick's cause of death was revealed in 2021. Protesters walking peacefully through Statuary Hall was revealed in 2021. It was actually live streamed by MSNBC on that day. This is just another political skirmish over who gets to control the narrative. The American people continually have their intelligence insulted by the Biden administration censors. We're tired of being told what we can and cannot see. Americans can see through spin. They're much better at seeing through the games that politicians play than the politicians think we are.